Hey folks, Mr. O'Brien here. So I wanted to close out the week talking a little bit about telescopes and how they work and how they use the properties of light in order to be able to let us see further out into the stars than we ever could with the naked eye. I don't think there may be another invention in the history of humankind that has had more of an impact on what we understand about the universe and how we see our place in it than a telescope. So stay tuned. And at the very end of this video, I'm going to treat you all to a rap music video where I rap about telescopes. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, really, Mr. O'Brien, you're going to rap about telescopes? Don't you think that's kind of pandering? And yes, it absolutely is pandering. So today I'm going to show you guys the designs behind two optical telescopes. Just the same type of light that we see with our naked eyes. So the two types of optical telescopes that we have are refracting telescopes and reflecting telescopes. So a refracting telescope was the first telescope to be invented. It was invented by our good old friend Galileo Galilei back in 1609. Man, what a year. And Galileo used two glass lenses in order to be able to concentrate light. And the way that this worked was, like we talked about before, by using refraction. That's why it's called refracting telescope in the name. He saw what he thought were ears around Saturn, which we later came to realize were actually rings of dust. He also saw 4 moons orbiting the planet of Jupiter. He saw sunspots. And he also saw that the planet Venus would go through phases, just like the moon goes through phases, depending on how light is hitting it from the sun. And this totally changed the way that people saw the world at the time. Back in 1609, the Catholic Church was pretty much the supreme power in Europe, and they believed that God created Earth at the very center of the universe. So when Galileo saw moons orbiting the planet Jupiter, he thought, well, they're certainly not orbiting the planet Earth. I don't think Earth is actually at the center of the universe. And unfortunately, Galileo ended up spending his remaining life under house arrest. And when he died, the church confiscated all of his possessions and sent his daughters to a convent to become nuns. So it's kind of a sad story what happened to our good buddy Galileo. Now, almost exactly 1 year later after Galileo died, Sir Isaac Newton was born. Okay, Sir Isaac Newton is the inventor of the first reflecting telescope. And in his design, he found that he could replace Galileo's lenses by using a concave mirror, which was some pretty cutting-edge technology at the time. And so instead of using reflecting telescopes as implied by the name, they rely on reflection. But using this improved design, Newton was able to confirm all of those observations that Galileo had made. And Newton has a very, very famous quote that says, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." So maybe Newton was referring back to Galileo there, saying that his work was only possible by building off of those previous breakthroughs by Galileo. But it's pretty incredible to think that this design that Newton came up with 350 years ago is actually pretty much the same design that we use for today's modern telescopes. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, a refracting telescope works by bending light. That's what refraction is. So Galileo did some experiments, and like I mentioned, he found that if he took a tube and he took 2 lenses and positioned them at the right distance inside that tube, they create a magnification of the image when light enters through and then comes out to meet his eye. And the way this works is when light comes into a telescope, it hits a lens. And the first lens that it's going to hit is called an objective lens. This is a convex lens, which means it bows outward on both sides. And so when light strikes this lens, it refracts through the material and bends. So it comes through nice and parallel, but it leaves at an angle, causing the beams of light to come closer and closer and closer together. And what this does essentially is that it's actually kind of shrinking the image down to a size that's actually going to be able to enter your eye. And if we kept doing that, now these beams of light would end up crossing each other. But Galileo put a second lens in there called the eyepiece lens that was convex, which means it bends inward. And so what happens then when the light beams strike that concave lens, they're bent a second time, and then they leave, again traveling in a parallel line. And so it goes in and it hits the observer's eye. So whatever that image was, say Galileo was looking at the rings of Saturn, again, any light leaving Saturn is going to be condensed, or concentrated rather, as it moves through the telescope until the image is reduced to the point where it'll actually be able to enter the eye of the observer, and they'll be able to see all of the detail that was present in that much larger image. So reflecting telescopes work on a very similar principle, but instead of using lenses to refract light, they use a mirror to reflect light. And so essentially what happens is, you can see in this diagram, light enters through the telescope. Okay, so at this other image up here in the corner, okay, it's entering through the telescope here. And when it does that, it's going to come through here all the way to the back of the telescope tube, where there is a concave mirror positioned. So the fact that that mirror has a curve to it, it means that the light is going to reflect or bounce off, but it's not going to bounce right back out at the same angle that it came in on. So it's going to strike that curved surface and bounce inward. And the same thing is going to happen down here. So rather than using the lens, like in our refracting telescope, to concentrate all of that light to a single point, it uses the curve of that mirror to do the same thing. Okay, that light then strikes a second mirror that's positioned at the center of the tube, and the light bounces off, where it then passes through a lens that's in the eyepiece of the telescope, and then enters the eye of the observer. So again, imagine that we are looking at Jupiter, and as light reflects from the sun off of Jupiter and then down to our telescope, it's going to enter through the tube of that telescope, going to bounce off of that back mirror there, and again, it's going to concentrate that light down to a single point, shrinking that image down smaller and smaller and smaller until it's able to enter the eye of the observer. So the very last thing that I want to leave you all with today is, again, earlier this week I had you guys read a little bit about and watch a video on the James Webb Optical Telescope. This is a telescope that's going to be launched in March of 2021. And this is basically operating on the same principles as Newton's reflecting telescope. Okay, all of those golden hexagons that you see are all put together to create one giant mirror. So when this thing points out into the stars and way out into deep space, any light leaving those stars that comes in here is again going to strike that mirror that's slightly curved, and it's going to bounce it back into here where we've got a really beautiful, powerful digital camera that's going to snap a photo of that image from way out. So again, based on the same design that Newton came up with so long ago. And I think not only that, but it's just really incredible that those same concepts that we use to build telescopes and look out into the stars are the same exact concepts that we use to build microscopes and look at the incredibly small. And if it weren't for that, we would have never discovered bacteria. We would have never discovered viruses. We'd have no idea what was causing the coronavirus right now. Maybe we would think it was the act of some wrathful god. But again, the fact that we were able to bend and magnify and use these properties of light has opened up our universe from what we can experience every day to the huge scale of the cosmos and the incredibly small scale of microbiology. All right, thanks guys. As promised, here's that wrap video. reflection or refraction. Yo, I wanna know what's the main attraction. I ain't acting, I'm just straight up asking, cause you know telescopes give me satisfaction, that's the truth. When I see them stars, if I bend or bounce light, I can see so far. How's that happen? Yeah, you might be asking. Well, sit back and relax while I cover refraction. Yeah, you see I got this lens, and when light passes through, then that light gets bent. What direction? Well, that kinda depends on the curve of the glass. Are you in or out, friend? If it bends out, then we call it convex. Make a baby bearded dragon look like a T-Rex. If it bends in, we're in opposite lands. Say ooga booga, I'm a concave man. And with reflection, it's the same dang thing, except instead of a lens, it's a mirror's domain. But with a mirror, then the image gets clearer, making refracting scopes just straight up inferior. I ain't playing. Do you know what I am saying? Galileo's scope is dope, but ain't no way it was staying. It's been replaced by big mirrors in space, but that's okay. Galileo, it ain't no cause for disgrace. It took the genius of Newton, who knew what he was doing when he took your design, and then he did some improving, but it's okay, cause your effort was joined on how to bring that light to a focal point. And don't you see that that's kind of the key? Taking light from the heavens, shrink it down to a piece. So when I look at the sky and light enters my eye, I can see so much beauty that I just wanna cry. O'Brien out, y'all.